Greetings and welcome to Speak Up, the television arm of Freemasonry throughout New Zealand. I am Barry Rushton, your host, where I talk to interesting people who have done interesting things, but still find time to be active in Freemasonry. We have another great show for you this week. My special guest is Submariner Andy Winter, formerly from the British Royal Navy, attached to the nuclear Polaris submarine fleet. I will talk to Right Worshipful Brother Gary Salmon, the Northern Divisional Grand Master, who successfully combined several lodges' benevolent activities to purchase an IRB for the Piha Lifesaving. We will round out our show with regular contributor Graham Houston, looking back on the life of a famous Freemason who contributed to New Zealand or the world in general. So sit back and enjoy. First up is our special guest, Andy Winter. Thank you for being a guest on the show today.
Pleasure, Barry.
Man, a nuclear-powered submarine.
Yeah.
Wow. Tell me about what that felt like.
They're pretty awesome machines. They're top of the technology at the time when they were designed and built. So
They were huge steel. I call them cigar tube, but they're just huge, aren't they? You know, or when I say huge, confined. They're only about as long as a football field, a rugby football field. Yeah. A lot thinner, but they're not that much room, I don't think, right?
No, that's right. There's a lot of equipment inside. You've got all the accommodation for the personnel. You've got all the missile compartments. You've got all the propulsion machinery, and all the living machinery, oxygen makers, and all this type of stuff.
I'll come back to the accommodation thing because it didn't look like a lot of room to me when I was looking at it. But we're talking about the resolution classes, right? And I think there were 4 of them made, and I think the 5th was ordered but not made, but there was 4 of them, I believe.
That's
right?
correct, yeah.
Were you on one of them, 2 of them?
I was actually on 2. The first submarine I joined was a submarine called Repulse, and she was in refit at the time.
Right.
So then I was seconded to another one in the class called Renown, and did 2 patrols on that.
Great. Because I believe that 2 of them were built in one, I'll say shipyard, and 2 were built, I think, in a place called Birkenhead, right?
That's right, yes.
Right there.
Yeah.
Were there any sort of, could you perceive any differences in the submarines themselves? Were they both built in the same place, the ones, or were they separate ones?
No, the only difference is there was a difference between the 2 different build sources. One was 1 frame longer than the other, so 2 of them were 1 frame longer than the other 2.
When you say a frame, you mean like a section?
That's right, yeah, a small section.
Small section, okay, good. Now, I know the program, I believe the program ran from about 1968 to about 1996.
That's right, yeah.
So when did you actually join the Royal Navy? How old were you when you joined?
I joined in September 1979. I was just 17 when I joined.
Wow.
I joined to do my apprenticeship with the Navy.
In the Navy, in the Royal Navy itself, not the submarines, in the Royal Navy.
In the Royal Navy, yeah.
But somewhere along the way, you made a decision, or someone came up to you and said, "Hey, we need you, and you to join the submarine clan," or did you say, "I'd like to do that"?
Obviously, when we were doing our apprenticeship, we're in contact with a lot of the views of technology with the ships and the submarines and the aircraft carriers, and at that time, I was drawn to the submarines because of the nuclear aspect, and I really enjoyed the nuclear knowledge.
The potential of it.
Absolutely.
Wow. So let me get this straight. So you're about 19, right? You weren't married then, right?
That's right.
I guess you might have been, you're probably living on base or something like that.
Yep.
But Mum and Dad were around, right?
Yep.
So you wandered home one night and you said to Mum and Dad, "Hey, look, guys, I'm going to go in one of these little cigar tubes. I'm going to go 250 feet at least below the surface. I'm going to stay there for about 9 weeks. You okay with that?" And what did Mum say? Did your Mum say, "Well, you go, Andy, have fun," or what?
Yeah,
Really?
I think she nearly had kittens. It was in the aftermath of the Falklands, and of course at one point they thought I'd gone away on one of the ships of the Falklands, so they were used to little shocks and surprises.
Well, were you under the ocean already, or were they just?
No, I was still in the middle of my apprenticeship.
Gotcha.
Yeah, 1982.
They thought you were about to go.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Now, I myself in a previous life, went from Auckland to England, Southampton, not in a submarine obviously, but in a ship, playing in a band.
Yeah.
And that was 5.5 weeks at sea. But I'd get up in the morning and I'd run around one of the decks and I'd go out there and smell the sea air, and I'd sort of go in and get something to eat, and I'd go and to watch a movie, or I'd go back to the cabin and have a sleep. Man, you guys can be 9 weeks, 143 of you, up to, in this thing. Now, I've looked at the cutouts, and hopefully we'll get one up on the screen there, of how much stuff is in there. And you talked about accommodation. Accommodation for about 4 or 5 or 6 of you is about the size of this table. Well, it appeared to be anyway. How did it all work? How did you eat together? Did you have shifts? Did you sleep separately, obviously? Did you, if someone was a snorer, how did you beat him to death? How did it work?
The accommodation is actually a bit more cramped than that. As a senior rate, the main senior rate's bunk space was held about 40 to 50 people, and the bunks were 3 tiers high.
Oh, yeah.
The officers, the only person with a single cabin was the captain. Even the officers were 2 or 4 to a cabin. It was quite surreal when you got into the bunk. The way you got in is the way you got out, unless you're built like a rake. Because if you put your elbow on the mattress, you couldn't straighten your fingers with the mattress on top. It was that tight.
Whoa! So you used to slide in like a letter in an envelope.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so you had to be quite agile to get into the top bunks.
So you didn't have your own designated bunk?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, you did.
Once you've qualified, once you've done your you've qualified on board and you're in a watchkeeping position, then you generally got a bunk.
Okay.
If you join a boat as a trainee, which I did on a couple of occasions, you generally bunked in a temporary bunk space, normally in the torpedo room. So you're cuddling the torpedoes.
It just never ceases to amaze me when I look at these pictures. I mean, how, did you have any exercise? Did you have a room where you could bounce up and down, or you just, once you were there, you were there?
Actually, the exercise area was in the missile compartment.
Was it?
We had a rower machine set up, some weights,
Okay.
and also there was a cycle as well.
Wow.
But we were only allowed to use that if the atmospheric conditions would let it. So
Okay.
if, say, there was an issue with any of the oxygen producing machinery, then you had to, they weren't allowed to exercise. Or if we were in close or possible close proximity to any contacts, then to reduce noise, we weren't allowed to exercise.
The thing that interests me the most is that with this confined space and man being man, you know, and the confinement of 140 of you together, I mean, how did people cope with the eccentricities of someone else? You know, I know the military people are fairly regimental, so they know what they've got to do, and there's that structure. I accept that, but that doesn't take away from the fact that, you know, you might annoy me, and so how would I satisfy that annoyance, so to speak? How was it handled?
A lot of that is dealt with in the initial vetting process, when they will weed out any people with possible temperament problems, aggression or egotistical people. Generally, when you're on board, there is obviously going to be some conflicts at some point, and it's down to the self-control. I can honestly say in 14 years in submarines, I never ever saw a physical fight.
Fabulous.
So arguments, differences of opinions, and generally the guys would shake and make up 2 hours later, but never a physical confrontation.
Now, I'm dying to ask you this, and you may not be at liberty to say, but, you know, did you ever fire one of those, like a dummy missile? I mean, did you ever go somewhere and say, okay, let's let one off just to make sure everything works? Not a real one, but, you know.
Well, there was two episodes that we had. The submarine I was on in refit, after I'd been seconded and came back to the submarine, we do a massive workup. I mean, the submarine's been out of the system for 3 or 4 years, so they do a big workup, and at the end of that work, it culminates in firing concrete blanks rather than the missiles. So that's the first experience of having that, and it's quite surreal.
So they screw the wall top off, so to speak.
It's
screw on a little concrete
literally concrete blanks, just a lump of concrete that's in the missile.
Everything gets set, right? And the captain says.
Absolutely.
And so what was the tension? It must have been hair raising.
For that, I mean, we were in an exercise situation, and when you're in that sort of situation, you might as well be in real life situation. Your mind is geared that way, so it's like it's real.
That's fantastic. And I mean, how did that feel? I mean, did you feel like, I mean, everybody's primed up, ready to go?
It's tremendous. I mean, the second time that we did the firings was actually over in the US, where we do our proper missile firings, which is the proper missile, but without warheads. And we actually carry out those firings on the Cape Canaveral range. And the submarines at depth, they fire the missile, and we're hearing the reports of whether the telemetry is good and whether it's tracking correctly.
Like it should do.
And it's marvellous.
I know we have in New Zealand, of course, in a number of countries, and fair enough to an issue with nuclear power and things like that. But the submarines after the Resolution model was the Vanguard model,
Correct,
I believe,
yeah.
right? And the ones after that, I think even with the Scorpion. Maybe I got that wrong, but I've read that they've got the systems refined, the propulsion systems refined, that they never have to actually refuel for 25 years of their service. They can go 40 times around the globe without refueling.
That's right. I mean, in the early days, the submarines probably would be refueled twice in their life. In boats that were built in the 90s, like the T-class boats, Trafalgar-class boats, they were looking at a single refuel. The submarines that are being built now, the Vanguard class and the A-class, they're whole of life.
Which is the only thing that actually stops them is, of course, they've run out of food, right? They've got about 3 months' food, and they've got to come up.
It's food and crew morale. That's the only two things that will force it.
Well, mate, it's fascinating. I mean, I really could talk a great deal. I'd like to talk a great deal because it sort of semi-excites me in the sense that, and I've seen pictures of them, and they are monsters out there, you know, and creeping through the ocean, you know. Now, you've only been in Freemasonry, I think, probably about 2012, I think you started.
That's correct,
right?
yeah.
So when did you get to New Zealand? Did you?
1996.
Oh, okay, so you have been here for a while. So what made you finally decide, okay, yes, I'm going to be a Freemason? I've got mates, or did you hear someone talk about it? Did you just think, have you been thinking about it for a while? Was it mates in the Navy that were, or what led you into Freemasonry?
It always piqued my interest when I was in the Navy in the UK, and you heard of someone who was in the club, the Dodgy Handshake Club, and it was there's something there, and it's, what is this? What's this all about? And it wasn't until I came to New Zealand and had time and the maturity to really start thinking about it. That's when I thought, I'm going to look into this. I'm going to investigate this.
You see, and in the short time that you have been in there, you actually have been very active in the lodge. I know you're not a master yet, but you have been active, you know. So in this short period of time, what's the greatest feature that you think Freemasonry has given to you as an overall sort of concept? What do you value most about being a part of the Freemason world?
The camaraderie is very much up there, very similar to the camaraderie that we enjoyed on the submarines. And the discipline, the regulation, is all quite similar to the military past. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Andy, been a great pleasure having you on, mate.
Thank you, Barry.
And thank you for coming, and it's been a great joy.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. It is my absolute pleasure to now welcome our next guest, Gary Salmon. Hello, Gary.
Hello, Barry.
Gary is the Divisional Grandmaster for the Northern Division, and that means the whole area from Taupo up, or
Taupo
something
north,
like that, right?
yes.
Which is a great sort of position for you to have. But prior to that, you were actually the District Grandmaster of a smaller area called Auckland West. Right?
Correct.
And in that area was a number of lodges that you sort of had control over, right?
That's correct. There was 18 lodges in the district.
Right. And I think it's fairly well known that most lodges themselves, apart from doing the normal activities, will also be looking for benevolent projects to do along the way. Some of them find something small, some of them find something a bit bigger, more adventurous. But I think you took these lodges under your wing and said, let's do something substantial. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. What happened in my time, the then Grandmaster for Freemasons New Zealand allocated to each of the districts in New Zealand $5,000 as a seeding fund for a charitable project within the community, something that would benefit a worthy cause within the community, and also derive some benefit for Freemasonry in the sense that we would be able to demonstrate our charitable aspects and the work we do in raising funds and supporting organisations within the community.
And so consequently then, I believe that you then asked the number of lodges to submit to you sort of ideas that could be built upon, looked at with a bit more depth.
Yes, that's right, because we had 18 lodges, and so there was various projects submitted from those 18 lodges, and in the end we had 6 to choose from. They all had a variety of costs associated with them, and in the final analysis at the final meeting when we all got together, it was a very easy choice actually to choose the Piha Surf Rescue Club, because their project was, well, at the time they had a number of ageing boats, and they wanted to replace one of these boats. So it was $25,000 for for a brand new boat, a new motor and a trailer to sit it on. Everybody bought into that very quickly. It was an easy project for us to support, particularly because of the nature of the work that the Piha Surf Rescue do.
Sure. These boats you're talking about, of course, we know those inflatable rubber boats, aren't they, where they sort of leap up and away they go. We've seen it on television. Right?
Yeah,
One of those
Piha Rescue. That's the boats, and it has it's got our Freemasons signage on the boat, which is displayed for everybody to see that the Freemasons bought the boat, and it gave us all a very warm and warm feeling of satisfaction, actually, and it was one of those projects where both groups benefited. Piha Surf Rescue got a boat, a brand new boat, and for their fleet, and the Freemasons had about 18 months of fun and enjoyment while we raised the money.
Exactly. I can probably see why it would have been such an easy choice to go with the Piha Rescue boat, because Auckland West, of course, you're out there on that west coast, you know, you've got everything there, you know, and it's, I guess you know that the Piha Surf Lifesaving Club is, I think, the oldest one in the country, or one of the oldest ones. It was formed back in, I think, about 1934. And I do know also there are about 17 other different surf life rescue operations in the Auckland area, but by far, and the one that's most well known, of course, is the Piha one.
Yes, well, of course, it's got a very high profile from the television program, and I guess we had hoped that within the television program we'd see more of our signage and more promotion of the Freemasons, but that didn't happen, and on reflection, of course, we realised very quickly that the program is not about the boat, it's about the people, it's about the people who do the rescues, it's about the lives they save, and again, it's become a very fulfilling project for Freemasons in the Auckland area who contributed to it.
There's something about advertising. You know, they say that half the money you spend on advertising is wasted, but you're never quite sure which half it is.
Yes.
But you'll find that Coca-Cola don't stop advertising.
Yes.
And the mere fact that perhaps the name is on the boat, people must see it during the day after walking along the beach if the boat's at rest, you know, and there's just an awareness, I'm sure, that's happening all the time.
Oh yes, look, I've been to Piha in the summer, and there's hundreds, thousands of people on the beach, and it gives you great pride to see our boat sitting on the beach with the donated by the Freemasons of Auckland, and people gather around and look at it, and it generates conversation about Freemasonry.
Or you can bring that up.
And it's great. So it's getting a lot of promotion.
Outside of your role within the Freemasons, you've been involved quite heavily with St John Ambulance, correct?
I have.
Tell us a little more about your career there.
Yeah. I first started as a frontline ambulance officer with the Wellington Free Ambulance, and then slowly drifted on to other roles within the ambulance service. I was chief executive of the Midland service based in Hamilton for a number of years. Then I was operations manager and general manager of Northern Region a bit later on. So I've had a whole career really in ambulance, and in the world of St John Ambulance, it's a bit more than just an ambulance service. We do a lot of other community things, and so again, it connected very nicely for me personally with the Piha Surf Rescue, where St John Ambulance and the Surf Rescue Club work together anyhow.
I bet they do.
So it was very satisfying for me personally to be able to.
I was somewhere the other day and I saw an advert come up for St John Ambulance wanting 40 more vehicles. And I'm thinking, wow, 40 more. But Freemasons as well have contributed within that framework, haven't they?
They have. The Freemasons have been very generous to St John Ambulance. Various lodges have purchased ambulances. They've purchased first response units. They've supported the ambulance fleet throughout New Zealand by buying NAVMAN things in the past. So we've had wonderful support from the Free Ambulance, and the two organisations are very compatible in their values and the sort of work we do.
Great. Now I know that you've been in Freemasonry for a fair period of time. I think it's about 45 years. I can say that. All I can say is you must have joined young. That's all I can say. But leaving that aside, tell me what made you join back when you did. Is there any overriding factor?
Well, look, at the time I was quite young. I was in my 20s, and I guess the main thing that was happening to me at the time was I was working quite hard. I was working quite long hours. I had a young family, and my whole life seemed to be going to work, going home, going to work, going home. And I realised that life needed more enrichment, and I looked at various other organisations that I might have joined, but a friend of mine talked to me about Freemasonry, and it seemed quite quickly that that fitted very neatly with what I was looking for, in so far as that I was able to fit the time commitments of Freemasonry around my family and work, and that and that it was an opportunity to develop into Freemasonry in a more committed way later on, if circumstances changed. And I'd have to say that's exactly what happened to me. I've very much enjoyed it.
Excellent. So in the 45 years that you have been, is there one redeeming feature of Freemasonry that's really formulated, been part of your makeup, that you've noticed either changed or just is now part of you? What's the one thing you can think of?
Well, I think it's more than one thing. I think it's part of the way you live your life in the end of the day, Barry. I think, you grow from the learnings of Freemasonry. No matter what your station in life is, the teachings of Freemasonry help you develop various skills. They help you to develop memory skills and learning to speak in public. They give you confidence. They give you camaraderie. And as you move on through different roles in Freemasonry, if you choose to do that, then it enhances your leadership skills. So it's been very, very beneficial to me in my work, in my life, and I've just enjoyed the whole experience.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for being here, Gary. It's been great having you on the show. Much success for the rest of your term.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing you out in the traps at some stage.
Thank you for having me.
And finishing off the show this week, we have our regular presenter on famous Freemasons through the world, Graham Houston. Nice to see you again.
Hello,
Graham.
Barry. Good to be back.
Graham, I used to live in the Wairarapa, and obviously I used to travel through Greytown, and I live in Auckland now, and there's a suburb called Grey Lynn. I know in the West Coast there's Grey River and also Greymouth. Now there's a consistency there. Tell me more who our guest is this week.
Right. The commonality is Sir George Grey.
Of course it is.
Governor of New Zealand back in the 1840s, and another great man with a great past
and a
in
fairly
New Zealand.
controversial sort of aspect to his life too, correct?
Controversial in that he came to New Zealand at a time of controversy, and today in 2080 we still have the same controversy.
Still about with it, aren't we? Man.
Absolutely. He came, and of course the characters in the story have changed from today. And so where it was the Plymouth Company, and they thought they were acting as the agent for the government to buy and sell land as they liked. And then you had different tribes trying to sell land off against the other. There was all sorts of things, but in essence it was the similar issues to what we have today at the time that he came.
New Zealand immigration went up and the Maori population went down. The balance sort of got a little bit out of balance, didn't it?
It did get a bit out of balance. He was a military man, in essence. He actually, did you know that he was not born in England? He was actually born in Portugal and didn't move to Ireland until the father died. And they moved to Ireland, and that's where his Irish connections came from. And he did have a lot of sympathies at that stage with the poor of Ireland, as he did when he came to Australia and over into New Zealand as well. But he was an explorer, a soldier, and a politician. And I think the politician part came by default more than that was something that he actually set out to do. He was governor of South Australia. In fact, he was one of the guys that the Europeans did come and did even bother to try to learn some of the local languages, and he did master that. So he did have sympathies lying with Indigenous people.
And he did resurrect the economy, didn't he, Australia? That's what made him quite a favourite back in England.
It did. And certainly in the South Australia area, that he certainly left that in very good state before he came over to New Zealand.
And I think that's why they asked him to come to New Zealand, didn't they, to try and do the similar thing?
Yeah, that's right. He was embroiled in the same, in a different set of circumstances in New Zealand, because there was already an establishment here. There was already people, already Europeans coming into New Zealand, and the Treaty of Waitangi was already underway. And so that the land rights were an issue then, as they are today. But he did do a lot of things for New Zealand. He did do a lot of good things. You've already mentioned some. There are streets and there are towns and there are cities named after George Grey. He gave the first land, or gave the land for the establishment of the Auckland Grammar School in Newmarket. He gave that. He gave a library establishment to Auckland and to Wellington in New Zealand, and one over in Africa. He built over at Mansion House, and he just generally was involved in life in Auckland and in New Zealand. Now, he could have been involved in that class type system, which was common at the time in England, but he wasn't. He did not. He tended to stay away from the class system. He was more of the prosaic lifestyle of Auckland as it was at the time and the place that he was helping to govern. So he was not a pretentious sort of guy. Now, there is an interesting fact that comes out. He can be seen as being unsympathetic and perhaps not taking into account the indigenous people and the Maori people at the time, and some people will speak quite harshly against him. Others will speak quite favourably, and it seems to me it depends what political bias that you have. Now, I can tell you there's in one publication, a historian with strong left leanings said that Governor Grey ran a ramshackle administration and that it was marked by broken promises and outright betrayal of the Maoris, which seemed to be in conflict with the other side of the story, which we found out, his views in Ireland, his views in Australia, and the way that he did. In fact, when he got that knighthood in New Zealand, he actually took one of the Maori chiefs with him as his esquire, as his consul, to be part of, because he felt they were as much part of that instrumental as what he was in there too. He joined a military lodge in Australia in 1831. Now, at that time, many of the regiments in the British Army had travelling warrants issued by the constitution of the Freemasonry under which they operated.
And he probably joined, as we know, a lodge here, an Irish lodge, probably here in New Zealand.
Yes,
here,
yeah.
A great choice, mate. Sir George Grey, a great New Zealander, really, even though he was born, as you say, in Portugal.
In Portugal. But he was, and we still regard him, I still regard him as a great New Zealander, and again, one of those people, one of those Freemasons who never forgot his roots.
Absolutely. A good choice again, Graham. Thank you very much, mate. Thank you for doing that. Well, that's our show for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. A thank you to our special guest this evening. If you'd like to know more about Freemasonry, then feel free to go to the Grand Lodge website, which is freemasonsnz.org, or call the telephone number in Wellington on the screen. They'll be glad to help. So until I see you again, have a great week.